My name is Dr. Leeanna Tross, and I am the sole survivor of Imperial research ship Theseus. What I witnessed in the depths of the void near the Hazeroth abyss defies the understanding of rational minds, yet I must record this account before the nightmares consume what remains of my sanity. The Inquisition has classified this incident as Zeno's Horrificus Maxima, and I pray to the Emperor that my testimony will serve as warning to those who venture into the cursed space beyond the light of holy terror. I served as the xenobiologist and xenoarchaeologist operating under the auspices of the Calixis sector's exploration mandate. Our mission seemed routine: to catalogue the dead stellar phenomena surrounding the Hazeroth abyss, that region of cursed space where failed stars drift in eternal darkness. The abyss had yielded numerous archaeological treasures in the past, ancient relics from long-dead civilizations that had been consumed by the void millennia before humanity first looked to the stars. The Theseus was a modest vessel, housing 47 souls in the Emperor's service. Our crew consisted of myself and 12 other researchers, 15 tech adepts under the supervision of Magos biologist Threnna, and 19 security personnel commanded by Sergeant Quinn. We had been conducting surveys for 3 standard months when we encountered the object that would doom us. I remember the moment with crystalline clarity. I was analysing spectral data from a nearby dead star when Auspex operator Vance reported an anomalous reading. The object appeared on our sensors as a metallic mass, approximately 50 meters in length, drifting through the void like a piece of stellar debris. Initial scans suggested it was composed of an unknown alloy, possibly of Zeno's origin, though its design patterns were unlike anything in the Imperial databases. Tech Adept Kipple was the first to express interest in the object. His augmetic sensors detected trace biosignatures within what appeared to be purely mechanical construction. This organic-mechanical fusion was unprecedented in our catalogued Xenos technologies, and Magos Threnna immediately ordered the object brought aboard for detailed analysis. The retrieval operation proceeded without incident. The object was secured in Containment Bay 7, our most isolated laboratory facility. Standard contamination protocols were observed, though I noted with growing unease that the object's bioreadings seemed to fluctuate during transport. The sensors registered cellular activity one moment, then showed readings consistent with dead metal the next. My first direct examination of the object filled me with a profound sense of wrongness that I could not then articulate. The artifact was roughly cylindrical, its surface a mottled fusion of corroded metal and what appeared to be fossilized organic matter. Veins of crystalline material ran through its structure like frozen blood vessels, and sections of its hull seemed to pulse with a rhythmic motion that reminded me disturbingly of breathing. The metal itself defied classification. Spectrographic analysis revealed trace elements that existed nowhere in the Imperial chemical database. The organic components were even more disturbing. They possessed cellular structures that were simultaneously alive and dead, existing in a state that violated every biological principle I had studied. Most unsettling were the neural pathways I discovered embedded within the artifact's structure, suggesting that this object had once possessed some form of consciousness. My detailed analysis consumed 3 days. During this time, I began to experience disturbing dreams. I would find myself standing in vast, lightless spaces filled with the sound of wet, slithering movement. In these nightmares, I was pursued by shapes that my mind could not properly process. Masses of writhing flesh that spoke in voices like grinding bone. I dismissed these as the product of exhaustion. Other crew members reported similar experiences. Tech Adept Vance complained of recurring nightmares about being consumed by living metal. Sergeant Quinn mentioned disturbing visions of his men being devoured by creatures that were all mouth and hunger. The ship's navigator, Hierophant Cassel, became increasingly agitated and spoke of sensing something moving in the space around our vessel, though Auspex scans detected nothing. It was on the 4th day that Tech Adept Kipple failed to report for his scheduled duty rotation. Security protocols required all personnel to maintain regular contact with the command center, and his absence triggered an immediate search. I joined the security sweep, hoping that my knowledge of the ship's layout might prove useful in locating him. We found no trace of Kipple in any of the ship's common areas. His quarters showed no signs of disturbance, and his personal effects remained undisturbed. The security recordings from the previous night showed him entering the lower decks to perform routine maintenance on the plasma generators, but the footage became corrupted with static interference shortly after he disappeared from view. The search teams combed every section of the ship. The lower decks revealed nothing but shadows and the omnipresent hum of the ship's systems. It was as if Kipple had simply vanished into the void. Sergeant Quinn ordered increased patrols and implemented a buddy system for all crew members. The following morning brought news that chilled me to my core. The bioreadings from the artifact had spiked dramatically during the night. The object, which had shown only intermittent signs of activity, now pulsed with unmistakable life. More disturbing still, spectral analysis revealed that the artifact's mass had increased by approximately 15 kilograms overnight. I spent the day conducting intensive scans of the object, searching for any explanation for this impossible development. The artifact's internal structure had changed, becoming more complex and more obviously organic. The metallic components were being absorbed and transformed into something that resembled living tissue, though no tissue I had ever encountered possessed such characteristics. By evening, I had reached a horrifying conclusion. The object was not merely alive, it was growing. The additional mass could only have come from one source, the ship's bio-waste recycling system. The artifact had somehow accessed our waste processing units and was consuming organic matter to fuel its own transformation. I immediately reported my findings to Magos Threnor, but the tech priest dismissed my concerns. He insisted that the artifact was merely a sophisticated piece of archaeotech, possibly of pre-imperial human origin. My suggestions that we jettison the object into space were rejected as overly cautious. The Magos was determined to unlock what he believed were the technological secrets contained within the artifact. That night, 2 more crew members vanished. Engineer Glissner and servitor tender Nodley both disappeared during the night shift. Like Kipple, they had last been seen entering the lower decks on routine maintenance duties. The security recordings showed the same pattern of static interference whenever the missing personnel moved beyond the main corridors. I was beginning to understand that we were not dealing with a simple technological artifact. The missing crew members were not simply lost, they were being taken. My analysis of the artifact revealed increasingly disturbing details. The biosignatures were becoming more complex, resembling neural patterns of vast sophistication. The object was not merely alive, it was intelligent. More terrifying still, it seemed to be learning, adapting to its environment with each passing hour. The crystalline veins running through the artifact's structure now pulsed with a rhythmic light that matched the ship's power cycles. I realized with growing horror that the object was interfacing with our systems, learning the layout of the ship and the habits of the crew. It was planning something, and the disappearances were merely the prelude to a larger horror. On the 6th day, I made a discovery that shattered my understanding of what we faced. While analyzing tissue samples from the artifact, I discovered genetic sequences that matched the missing crew members. Kipple's DNA was present in the organic matrix, along with traces of Glissner and Nodley. The artifact was not simply consuming them, it was incorporating their biological material into its own structure. But the most horrifying discovery was yet to come. As I studied the genetic patterns more closely, I realized that the artifact retained not just the physical characteristics of its victims, but their memories as well. Neural pathways within the object contained encoded information that could only have come from the minds of the consumed crew members. The object had been feeding on our people, absorbing their knowledge and experiences. It knew everything they had known about the ship, about our mission, about the location of Imperial worlds in the Calixis sector. We had not discovered an ancient relic, we had awakened something that had been waiting in the void for exactly this opportunity. I attempted to warn the command crew, but Magos Threnor refused to listen. He had become obsessed with the artifact's technological potential, speaking of the advancement it could bring to the Omnissiah's knowledge. He ordered increased security around the containment bay, not to protect the crew from the object, but to protect his prize from what he termed hysterical interference. That night I witnessed the true horror of what we faced. Unable to sleep, I had returned to my laboratory to review the data one final time. As I worked, I heard sounds from the containment bay. Wet, slithering noises that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I activated the observation servitor and directed it to scan the bay. What I saw defied rational description. The artifact had opened like a grotesque flower, revealing an interior cavity lined with what appeared to be digestive enzymes. Within this cavity, I could see the partially dissolved remains of the missing crew members, their bodies being slowly absorbed into the artifact's structure. But they were not simply dead, they were still moving, still conscious, their faces twisted in silent screams of agony. As I watched in horror, the artifact began to reshape itself. The metallic components flowed like liquid, forming new appendages and structures. The organic portions pulsed with increasing vigor, and I realized that the object was preparing to emerge from its dormant state. The creature that emerged from the artifact was unlike anything I have ever seen. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body a writhing mass of pale, maggot-like segments covered in viscous mucus. Metallic threads ran through its flesh like veins, and crystalline studs protruded from its surface like malevolent eyes. Its head was a cluster of frond-like sensory organs surrounding a radial mouth filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. But the most terrifying aspect of the creature was its intelligence. As it moved through the containment bay, it demonstrated an understanding of the ship's systems that could only have come from the consumed crew members. It knew exactly how to disable the security sensors, how to access the environmental controls, how to move through the ship undetected. I realized with growing terror that this had all been planned. The object had not drifted into our path by chance, it had been waiting for us. The creature inside had been dormant, conserving its strength until it could infiltrate a suitable vessel. Now it was awake, and it was hungry. The creature began to move through the ship with purpose. Using the knowledge it had gained from its victims, it accessed the life support systems and began to alter the atmospheric composition. The air became thick and humid, filled with a sickly sweet odor that made breathing difficult. The temperature dropped to near freezing, and the ship's lighting flickered with increasing frequency. More crew members began to disappear. The creature hunted and isolated individuals, consuming them one by one. Each victim added to its knowledge and strength, and grew larger and more confident with each feeding. I tried to warn the remaining crew, but communication systems were failing throughout the ship. It began interfering with our electronics, using its understanding of Imperial technology to turn our own systems against us. The ship was becoming a trap, and we were the prey. Magos Threnna finally understood the magnitude of our situation when the beast emerged from the lower decks and began hunting in the main corridors. The tech priest's augmetic sensors detected the creature's approach, but his attempts to seal the blast doors failed as the creature demonstrated an intimate knowledge of the ship's security protocols. The final confrontation in the containment bay was brief and horrific. As it moved, its body flowing like liquid as it engulfed the Magos, I watched through the observation servitor as Threnna's mechanical components were dissolved by acidic secretions, while his biological parts were absorbed into the creature's mass. With the ship's senior officers dead or consumed, panic spread through the remaining crew. The Xenos had grown to enormous size, its body now filling entire corridors. It had begun to reproduce, spawning smaller versions of itself that hunted in coordinated packs. The ship became a nightmare of organic horror, with the creature's offspring infesting every section. I retreated to the ship's archive center, hoping to find some record of what we faced. The ancient data vaults contained fragmentary references to creatures called maggot men and dream eaters, beings that were said to emerge from the depths of the void to feast on the living, but I now understood their terrible truth. The creatures were called Slaugth, and they were among the most ancient and malevolent Xeno species in the galaxy. They were described as beings of pure hunger, addicted to the consumption of sentient brain matter. The text spoke of their ability to take human form, to infiltrate Imperial installations, and to spawn biomechanical constructs that served as their tools of war. The attack on our ship was not random. The Slaugth had been using the Hazeroth Abyss as a staging ground for infiltration missions into Imperial space. Our research station had been deliberately targeted, not for its scientific value, but for its strategic position and its access to Imperial communication networks. The final phase of my ordeal began when I attempted to send a warning to the nearest Imperial outpost. The ship's astropathic choir chamber had been sealed since the beginning of the crisis, and I hoped that the navigator, Hierophant Cassel, might still be alive within. The journey to the choir chamber was a nightmare of creeping terror. The ship's corridors had been transformed into something resembling the inside of a living organism. Walls pulsed with organic growth, the air was thick and burned my lungs with each breath. The Slaugth constructs patrolled the passages, their asymmetrical forms moving silently through the transformed environment. I navigated my way with desperate stealth, using maintenance shafts and service corridors to avoid the hunting packs. The ship's layout had been altered by the organic growth, and familiar passages led to chambers that resembled the interior of some vast digestive system. The Slaugth were not merely occupying the ship, they were transforming it into something that could serve their purposes. I found Hierophant Cassel in the choir chamber, barely alive but still conscious. The navigator's third eye had been sealed with some kind of organic secretion, preventing him from accessing the warp. The Slaugth had kept him alive for a purpose. Together, we attempted to send a warning to the Imperial Navy. The astropathic transmission was difficult to encode, as we needed to communicate the nature of the threat without alerting the Slaugth to our activities. We used ancient cipher codes that would identify the Xeno's threat to those trained to recognize such signs. The transmission was intercepted by Inquisitor Morwen Kanda of the Ordo Xenos, who had been close to our location. The Inquisitor recognized the significance of our message and immediately left with his kill team to our location. Eventually, the Slaugth had detected our transmission, moving to eliminate the remaining crew members. I watched in horror as they consumed the last of the security personnel, their bodies dissolving in the creature's acidic embrace. The final confrontation came when the adult Slaugth, now grown to enormous size, attempted to prevent our escape. The creature had absorbed the knowledge and memories of the entire crew, making it intimately familiar with every aspect of Imperial military doctrine. It knew our strengths and weaknesses, our tactics and strategies. The battle was brief but desperate. The Slaugth used its biomechanical constructs to seal the blast doors, trapping us in the choir chamber. The creature's offspring swarmed through the ventilation systems, their acidic secretions eating through the bulkheads. We were outnumbered and outgunned, facing an enemy that knew our every move before we made it. The Ordo Xenos had developed specialized weapons and tactics for dealing with the Slaugth threat. The boarding action was a nightmare of close-quarters combat. The Slaugth constructs fought with desperate fury, their biomechanical bodies adapting to each new threat. The kill team advanced methodically through the ship, using flame units and melter charges to burn away the organic infestation. I guided the Imperial forces through the ship's transformed corridors, using my knowledge of the Slaugth's behavior to predict their movements. The creatures had made the ship into a reflection of their own alien nature, a living weapon designed to spread their influence throughout the galaxy. The final battle took place in the ship's central core, where the original Slaugth had grown to monstrous proportions. The creature was no longer recognizably the artifact we had discovered. It had become something far more terrible, a fusion of organic horror and mechanical filth. Its body filled the entire chamber, its sensory fronds tracking our movements as we entered. The Slaugth spoke for the first time, its voice a mixture of all the crew members it had consumed. It offered us knowledge, power, and immortality in exchange for our cooperation. The creature claimed to be a member of the Slaugth Empire that existed beyond the reach of Imperial space, and it promised that our collaboration would be rewarded when its kind inherited the galaxy. Inquisitor Kanda responded with bolt of fire. The Slaugth's regenerative abilities allowed it to survive wounds that would have killed any other creature, but the Ordo Xenos' weapons were adept at overcoming such defenses. The creature's biomechanical constructs were systematically destroyed, and its organic mass was burned away by concentrated melter beams. The Slaugth's death throes were horrific to witness. The creature's final act was to trigger some kind of biological self-destruct, attempting to spread its essence throughout the ship's systems. Inquisitor Krell ordered the immediate evacuation of the Theseus. The ship was too thoroughly contaminated to be salvaged, and there was a risk that some trace of the Slaugth infestation might survive. Demolition charges were placed throughout the vessel, and we withdrew to a safe distance. The ship's plasma reactors overloaded simultaneously, creating a brief star that illuminated the dead space of the Hazeroth abyss. I watched from the observation deck of the inquisitorial cruiser as the vessel that had been my home for 3 years was reduced to scattered atoms. But even as the ship burned, I could not shake the feeling that we had won only a temporary victory. The Slaugth I had encountered was described as a vassal construct, a biomechanical creation rather than a true member of the species. If such creatures were merely tools, what horrors might their masters possess? Inquisitor Candor recruited me as a specialist consultant, making me one of the few Imperial citizens authorized to study the Slaugth threat. My first-hand experience with the creatures made me valuable to the Ordo Xenos, though the knowledge I carried was a burden I would not wish on anyone.